today I want to talk more about birdsong. You can't talk too much about birdsong this time of year. And this talk is set up to compare species in sets of three. So three species that have a similar kind of song. And I'm going to play their song and then talk about what I hear as the key distinction, but among the different songs. And these are arranged, of course, by groups of similar sounding species. I also want to start off with a little bit of history and background on sound recording equipment. It's pretty interesting just to look back at my own experience, now getting to be rather lengthy, to see what people were using in the 70s, for example, compared to what we're using now. So I hope you'll find this little bit of history at the outset to be interesting and informative as well. Again, we're going to talk about bird song through this whole talk, and also not only hearing songs, but seeing songs. So we're going to look at some sonograms and see how visualizing these songs might help certain people. So first, a little intro on birdsong frequencies and the role of noise. I want to talk about, as I said, recording vocalizations, seeing those vocalizations by producing sonograms, either in hard copy or in some sort of software on your computer. Comparing similar songs, so most of the talk will be about comparing birds that have similar songs, such as robin, black-headed grosbeak, and say western tanager. And I will tell you what I think are the key differences, and then just keep moving through that, and then you are obviously going to be able to go back and rewind and listen again to anything you find helpful or interesting or puzzling. And then end with just a few bits of more resources for you to consult in studying and learning birdsong. So birdsong frequencies, as you can see on this graph, if you look down kind of in the middle, birdsong frequencies are actually a smaller subset than what humans use and can hear, but we both top out around 20 kilohertz. You can see on the lower end, of course, you've got subsonic sounds made by things like whales. And then you've got these really, really high frequencies made by dolphins and bats. But even those aren't the king, the queen of birdsong or of song frequency are these greater wax moths, which make sounds at 300 kilohertz, which is, I can't even imagine how high that is. We're going to play a couple of birds with the highest frequency songs, and I'm not sure you'll even be able to hear it on this recording. And if you can't, you can go to Xenocanto or All About Birds and listen to these really high frequency songs. So these are really good hearing tests. If you can't hear these two birds, you're starting to lose that top end, and they're only at 10 kilohertz. So first I'll play Costa's Hummingbird, and I'm just going to play it once because, again, I'm not sure how well this will come through on the recording. So a super high frequency song, it actually goes up the scale and goes beyond our hearing. The next song is a Blackpoll Warbler. And that's ridiculously high. You can maybe, there you go. Both of those songs are super high frequency, around 10 kilohertz, and probably going even above that. And so again, if you couldn't hear that on the video, go to Xenocanto and listen to a few of those, and you can hear what the highest songs that most of us will hear are sound like. It's always super annoying to me when I'm trying to go out and really listen to songs or recorded songs to have all of the sources of noise out there. And I'm sure you're familiar with these when you're around Boise, especially. You've got a lot of mountain bikers and walkers, and there's always seems like somebody starting a lawnmower just when you're ready to get a good recording or a good listen to something. Construction noise. The most evil thing out there, I think, is the leaf blower. It's just a horrible roar out there. And also single engine aircraft, because they take so long to go across the sky and they just go on and on and on and on. So those are some of the major obstacles to hearing and certainly to recording bird songs. So recording vocalizations, this is a microphone that I bought in graduate school in the early or the mid 70s, the Nan Gibson parabolic microphone. I still have it and I still use it. It's designed, as you can see, with a parabola, and you still see these in use at football games and sporting events because that parabola collects the sound and focuses it back on that microphone, and that microphone is amped, and then it goes into the recorder. So it's still a very, very effective recording tool, although depending on the size of the parabola, it's kind of large and bulky to carry around. The very first recording devices were these Niagara reel-to-reel tape recorders. These are long gone. You can hardly even find pictures of them anymore. But one of the most famous, and perhaps the most famous person to record bird songs in those years is Ted Parker. He contributed tens of thousands of recordings to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and was an expert in South American birds. Unfortunately, was killed in a plane crash as a fairly young man, but that's the recorder that you can see him using in probably somewhere in the Amazon. The big advancement after the reel-to-reel were the cassette recordings, and you may remember, you're old enough when cassettes and 8-tracks came out about the same time, and there's competition. But this cassette recorder by Marantz was the workhorse. I know a few people who do a lot of recording who literally wore out several of these things. The bearings, the parts just wore out and could not be repaired. So that was the real workhorse. I've got that and I've used that as well. Wonderful tool. The thing is, you end up with cassette tapes, then you have to convert those to a digital file if you want to process them on the computer. I've used a Sennheiser shotgun mic. You can see this long mic here that is very directional. It's much lighter and easier to haul around than that parabola. And the little digital recorders these days, this happens to be Edirol. It's about the size of a smartphone. Works really great if you want to record songs. And look at the storage differences, of course. The old days, a 60-minute cassette held about 90 megabytes of information. And so today, a 32 gigabyte memory card that goes in one of these recorders is the same as 355 cassette tapes. So I've got the 355 cassette tapes in a box in the closet, mostly full of sage thrasher songs, which I will get to one of these days. Of course, today we've got these beautiful little computers that everybody carries around, and Cornell has done a very nice job of explaining how to record with smartphones, and they really work quite well, surprisingly well, without even another mic. If you're fairly near a bird and you don't have a lot of noise going on, note at the bottom there, don't use your voice memo. That does not have an adequate frequency response for birds. But you can download several different free apps that will give you that frequency response up to 10 kilohertz. And so you can go record black-billed warblers and get their song. Otherwise, the voice memo apps won't even hear that. They won't record it at all. So visualizing songs, this is the device I used in grad school, and I could only find a picture of it, as you see at the bottom there, from the Science Museum group. These are truly old school machines. Look at that thing, and I don't even remember what all those dials and buttons were for. But you take your reel-to-reel tape, bring the song file in there, and the song was produced in the most bizarre way. I don't know, when you think back on it, who thought this up. But that drum right there would spin. It's got a piece of special paper on it. It would spin very fast. And that little thing right there is like a hot burning, like a soldering iron tip. And so the drum starts to spin, and as you played the song to make the sonogram, that would slowly go down over that paper and literally burn dark patterns into the paper. At the end, you had a perfectly good sonogram. I published several papers based on these, but you can see that drum, that piece of paper, is only 2.2 seconds worth of song. So this works okay for sage sparrows and brewer sparrows, which I worked on. But when you get to sage thrashers or mockingbirds or house finches, which sing on and on and on and on, it makes my head spin to think how many of these 2.2 second clips you would have to burn to get a 15-minute sage thrasher song. It's just not practical. So it's just as well that that technology has been replaced. And now we have these amazing tools. Again, you can get started for free with Audacity, for example. It's a good place to look at your bird songs and also to take out those low hums if you've got an airplane going overhead or a lawnmower in the distance. Fairly straightforward to do. One thing I wanted to point out, which is really, really fun if you don't do anything else, that little arrow that I just circled is where you can slow down the playback. Bird songs are so fast, it's amazing to go up there and slow that down so you can hear the parts of their song and what they're doing in more detail. It will blow your mind, I promise. So go do that. Pick any bird and check it out. Of course, Raven Light, I think, is also free from Cornell. And then if you want to spend money and get so many features, I don't even know what half the things are. I don't know 90% of what Raven Pro does. But if you get more and more serious, there's more and more serious tools available, as you might expect. So if you haven't looked at sonograms, so let me play this song Sparrow maybe 2 times. I mean, I'll just play it once because you can go back and rewind and listen to it. But you'll be able to hear the 2 introductory notes. Remember, song sparrows around here have 2 to 5 introductory notes, and then a kind of a buzz, and then a quick trill, and then it goes on with some other notes. And in the background, you can see it's picking up a robin. I think there's a yellow warbler. I can't remember what else. But these fainter traces in the background are other birds behind the main bird, and you almost always get that when you're recording birds. That one's really perfect because at the very beginning is a train whistle in the distance. Not too obstructive in this particular song, but that's probably that noisy band at the very bottom. And again, using Audacity, you could filter that completely out if you want a little cleaner signal. All right, I also want to point out, I think I pointed out last time, but a really good place to look at these visualizations is yet another tool from Cornell called Birdsong Hero. When you go into Birdsong Hero, it will show you 3 sonograms, and then you can play a song, and then you just simply match what you hear to which of those figures you think it is. And once you go through this a few times and go to the advanced version, there aren't all that many songs, I think maybe 10 at each level. You can start to I think pretty quickly get a good idea of what the sounds look like. And for some people, that having that visual picture in the brain along with what they're hearing really helps to sort of gel the recognition and identification of birdsong. So check that out, it's a lot of fun. So comparing similar songs, I want to give credit to Zeno Canto. That's where I get all my bird vocalizations. It's a global database, and they just passed 10,000 species in the database. So that's most of the species on Earth, which is absolutely incredible. One fun thing about going to Zeno is right there on the right, it says latest new species, and they list some things. And today it was Edward's fig parrot, which I have never even heard of. So he's like, okay, let's see what Edward's fig parrot looks like. And it's like, okay, wow, there's another bird I just discovered that I knew nothing about. This bird's in New Guinea. So let's start with 3 birds that have trilled songs. And you are apt to find chipping sparrows and dark-eyed juncos in the same habitat. And also you might have chipping sparrows and brewer sparrows in the same habitat or very close to each other. Well, actually brewers and juncos too. You could have all of these birds overlapping, say, up around Silver City. So you might hear a trill. It could be any of these birds. So let's first, I'll again play each song just once and then move on. So the chipping sparrow is typically a very flat song that's very dry, and the trill seems to stay pretty much on the same pitch. It doesn't tend to go up or down. You can see why that may be called dry or insect-like. Now, the dark-eyed junco also can be pretty much on the same pitch, but it's much more musical or tinkling. It's not so flat and so insect-like. Now, brewer sparrow, some brewer sparrows sing a single trill, but most of them have two trills. That's their most common song type. The first trill will be a little higher and faster, and the second a little lower pitched and more slow and slower. So I think this is a classic one here. So, of course, they've also got a long song that's a whole long series of rambling trills, but that's very, very distinctive. I'm not playing it today, but there's nothing that does anything like that, so you're not apt to confuse that. But these three, you can, I think, see the similarities. And if you go to Zeno and listen to a bunch of chipping sparrows and a bunch of juncos and a bunch of brewer sparrows, you'll see there's quite a bit of overlap in individual birds. So the idea of the quality of dry and flat, tinkling, two-part becomes very helpful. All right, for you. So the flycatchers are that group of birds that does not learn. They don't learn their songs; they're innate, so they tend to be much simpler and very stereotyped. And our favorite bird up at the Foothills Learning Center is Say's Phoebe, with this very simple downward note that it does over and over. Once you hear one of these Say's Phoebes, you pretty much heard them all. If I can get the button to go. The Western wood pewee, also a flycatcher, also has a single note, but the quality is really quite different. It's buzzy. It tends to go up the scale. And then finally, Western kingbird, it's really not so much like phoebes and peewees because it's a very rapid twitter. But again, these birds are born with their songs, so pretty much every Western kingbird sounds like every other Western kingbird. Unlike the sparrows and the juncos we just listened to, which learn and then therefore have a lot more variety in what they're doing. These three birds have very loud calls. They also have innate songs, so they tend to sound pretty much the same anywhere you hear them. The belted kingfisher, the American kestrel, also a very distinctive, very sort of loud, agitated call that's very distinctive. And then finally, northern flicker. So all three very loud, carry a long way, and as soon as they start, you know what you've got, unless you've got a starling mimicking these, and starlings are quite good at mimicking all three. Another set, and I'm bringing the flicker in again because another call is somewhat similar to one of the calls of the red-winged blackbird, which we'll play first. Next, the single call of the flicker. think you can see how those two sound fairly similar. And then the downy woodpecker is pretty different because it's not nearly as loud, but it's in that same category of just a single sort of a descending or level call. Okay, so those are some simple calls. Now moving back to song learners and some birds with some really complex and very fast songs. The lazuli bunting, if you can hear it, this is a good one to slow down in Audacity and listen to. Very often their notes are paired. They come in twos. And the quality is very tinkling and musical to my ear. In the same habitat, you can have both of these other species. We've talked about song sparrows quite a bit over the last couple of months because they have a number of cues that make them distinctive, including those opening notes, 2 to 5 notes. And then finally, the house wren. And I put these together because they're often singing right on top of each other. If you go up into Hulse Gulch or Military Reserve in the riparian areas, you have all these birds singing right on top of each other. And it's a good place to practice sort of the disentangling those qualities from each other. House wren, very rapid, trills right back to back. Play that one more time. Some of the most complex singers are on this page right here, especially the chat and the catbird, which are, well, we'll play them. They go on and on and on. But Bullock's Orioles has got some tricky sounds too. And if, for example, if the chat or the catbird are not singing a full, long, rambling song, and they're just doing some bits, some of those bits can sound a lot like a Bullock's Oriole. We'll start with Bullock's. So those squeaky notes are real characteristic, but that opening chatter is very much like yellow-breasted chatter. One of the things about the chat is it pauses a little bit between its different little squeaks and pops and croaks and things that it does. It gives a little bit of a break. The gray catbird tends to kind of go on and on and on and ramble on like a thrasher. We'll listen to him next. Well, of course, the gray catbird is in the thrasher family, so that's probably not too surprising. Very nice. So again, all three of these birds can be found like today, June 16th, in the foothills around, or in the foothill drainages, Hulse Gulch Military Reserve, and other places singing. If you get in the right spot, you can hear all three at once on top of each other. Sort of the classic songs that go up and down, but have different qualities and different speeds are these three. The American robin and black-headed grosbeak, I think, in my mind, come closest to each other. And every once in a while I hear a robin, and it's, boy, that's pretty fast. It's like a grosbeak. The tanager is buzzy, so I think we can hear that. But let's start with the robin. It's a good song to get in your head because they're so common and everybody knows them. So just up and down, pretty fast, pretty clean whistles. I think you'll hear that the black-headed grosbeak is higher and faster. So those can be pretty similar if you get just the right birds. Again, they're learning in their songs, so they don't all sound exactly the same. And then finally, Western Tanager has the same up and down quality, but pretty fast, but it's very buzzy. I think you'll be able to hear that. Play button. So those are my favorite, three favorite up and down birds. Again, you can hear all these birds together singing in the same place as well. So a lot of really good chances around Boise to listen to these similar species singing together, and just go out and listen and see if you can tease them all apart and figure out which is which. So here's the Western Tanager. Again, you just heard him, but there are two Vireos that also have buzzy songs. But the speed here is really different. And I'm going to go from warbling Vireo, which is very fast, to Western Tanager, which is kind of in the middle, and then Cassin's Vireo, which is quite slow. But they're all buzzy up and down phrases. We'll do warbling Vireo first. I can never hit the play button the first time. That would be nice. Here we go. Now, those can actually sound quite a bit like Cassins or house finches. So there's another comparison. You can check that out yourself. I'm not going to play those today. So there's a fast Vireo with a buzzy up and down song. And then we already heard Western Tanager, but as a reminder, and then finally Cassin's Vireo. And once again, you can find all these birds together. They're all up at higher elevation right now, especially if you get up into Ponderosa. You can get Western Tanagers and Cassin's Vireos in the same habitat, really in the same trees. And a good chance if you're camping up along the Payette River, up around McCall, anywhere up a little higher, especially this month and early in July, you can hear these birds together. So the Cassin's Vireo is very slow. It's almost like he's, thinking a little bit between each phrase what he's going to sing next, whereas the others are just going. Warblers can be pretty confusing. We don't have all that many warblers in the West, and these birds are really pretty distinctive. First, I'll play the yellow warbler, which, boy, they are just in so many different habitats. I was up at Silver City yesterday and had yellow warblers up pretty high in some habitats I wasn't really expecting to hear them, but once you know their songs, then you know what you've got. And this one definitely has that pattern that's characterized as please, 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 pleased to meet you. I'm not sure how many pleases are in there, but the pattern is pretty distinctive, and I find it very helpful. The yellow rump warbler is very common in the higher elevation forests, and it has a real classic two-part warbler song. A lot of warblers have kind of a weak little series of notes, and then a second series that's usually a little bit lower. It might be higher, but there's usually two series. I'll play that again. You can hear that it drops off a little bit in the second part of the song. So not a very strong song at all, and doesn't carry very far. And that's another characteristic I use, for example, to separate it from the Gillibray's warbler, which we'll listen to in a second. The common yellowthroat, very, very distinctive song, one of the more, I would say, unmistakable songs out in the marshes. Not going to be overlapping with yellow rump, but it certainly overlaps habitat. At least they can be quite adjacent with yellow warblers. So it would be nice if more birds were as distinctive as that. You could hear the redwings in the background. And if you kept listening, you'd probably hear marsh wrens and yellow-headed blackbirds and everything else out in the marsh. So here we're going to bring yellow-rumped warbler back. I mentioned McGillivrays. So McGillivrays, to me, has a very, unlike the sort of weak, half-hearted yellow-rumped warbler, McGillivrays has a pretty strong song, and each note is driven with a little bit more force. So again, it still has that two-part song, two little phrases, but a lot more punch in the individual notes. We'll play Yellow Rumped again. And then the last, orange-crowned warbler, once more, all three species can be heard in the mountain shrub community, especially if you have some trees for the yellow-rumped warblers, and have all three of these singing in the same exact place where you're standing. Now, the orange-crowned warbler also typically has two parts to the song, but they're very fast. The McGillivrays, you could count the notes. Orange-crowned warblers have a very much faster phrases, but again, typically two phrases and a little kind of a weak song, but much faster than yellow-rumped warbler. And that one doesn't have so much as two phrases. It's one phrase that drops off, but even when they're broken into two, that's the very typical pattern. Very, very quick notes. Again, quite unlike McGillivrays or yellow rump. So we're bringing lazuli bunting back to compare it to house finch and American goldfinch. So these are birds that they mimic, they go on, they sing fast. One bird is always different from the next bird, and they can be quite confusing if all you do is hear them. We should be really familiar with that. I always like to point out at the very end of the song, they very often have that little rising buzz, almost like a siskin, which these other birds don't have, and even Caston's finches, which can sound quite similar, do not have. So a reminder of the bunting again, paired notes, they're tinkling or musical. And then finally, American goldfinches, which just go on with a tremendous array of twitters. They're incredible mimics, but because their songs are so fast and high-pitched, sometimes it can be, or it often is very hard to pick out the mimicry they're doing. But if you get a goldfinch singing sometime, take a moment, put your glasses on them, open your ears, and just let them go and see if you can hear what all he's imitating. So a lot of little squeaks on that particular bird, but that you can't always tell what you're going to get from American goldfinch because they're so incredibly diverse. I would say the buntings and house finches are much more sort of predictable in what sounds you're going to hear, but goldfinches do every sort of thing. So a few more. The two thrushes that are common in this area, I just got a query yesterday about a thrush and described the song, and I could tell that it was a hermit thrush. So hermit thrushes they sing a single note and then either go up the scale, down the scale, or maybe just sort of straight across. It doesn't really go up or down. Let's listen for that. So opening note and then up, down, or across. I think we heard all three of those. Swainson's thrush doesn't have that opening note and they just go up the scale. Once again, these two species are found together very commonly in the forests just around Bogus Basin. Just get up into the trees a little bit, into a little bit wetter forest, and you'll have both of them singing at the same time, again, almost on top of each other. Good chance to compare thrushes. So listen to the thrushes and see if you can't quite easily distinguish those two. So the flycatchers are famously, the Empidnax flycatchers are famously difficult to identify by sight, but by song, they're really pretty easy. Willow flycatcher is the easiest. I'll leave that for the last. But we get a lot of duskies and grays, and especially when they're moving through in mid-late May, and they're moving through the valleys and lower elevations, and if they're not singing yet, they can be a real challenge. And even in the breeding habitat, the gray flycatchers are out in the junipers and big sagebrush, that is very tall sagebrush, and the duskies are just a little bit higher up into the mixed coniferous forest, but they overlap. So you can have either bird in those drier forest habitats. To me, the dusky has a twitterier, chippier song, and the gray flycatcher a very flat sort of a song. So let's listen to dusky first. So it's got that one little flat kind of whack note that sounds like a gray flycatcher, but it has much more the pippy, twittery types of notes interspersed in there. Now let's listen to gray. So that bird's not doing any twittery notes. Sometimes they'll sprinkle in some, but you can hear that just really flat, sort of fat, splat note, like Dr. Seuss, which the dusky doesn't do. And then finally, willow, which is a real distinctive pit spew song. You maybe heard a common yellowthroat in the background with that very distinctive up and down song. So this bird's a riparian bird more than gray and duskies out in the drier forest. Willows tend to like ponds and willow edges of ponds, not even so much flowing water, but more still water. You'll get willows. They came through here in good numbers this year. In the spring, I had 7 in one morning in military reserve, just singing one after the other up the drainage. But those birds are all moving on to breed somewhere else. I doubt they're breeding there. Some of the birds I still find occasionally to be fairly challenging are the swallows, and I think we've got all the swallows in Idaho. I'm just going to go through 3 of them here, but they can be challenging. And I think Tom spent some time on the river this year shooting a few thousand pictures of violet green swallows to get that violet green rump and back. I think he succeeded quite well. But when you have all these swallows, especially early in the spring coming through, it's a good chance to try to listen to those birds and see if you can sort them out by the vocals. And of course, they're flying around so fast, they can be real challenging. But these 3 especially, I think, are pretty different when you start listening, as is the case with most birds. The barn swallow has a really complex, much more complex than these other 2. So let's listen to some notes out of a barn swallow. I mean, that's crazy stuff. It sounds like it's chewing on a rubber balloon or something. I don't know how they do that. And the bank swallow, to me, always sounds like a little ray gun, a little zip, zap, zap. So not nearly the complexity or dimensions of a barn swallow, pretty distinctive. And then violet green, a little more musical and twittery. After that bird has a few more of the squawky sounds like a barn swallow makes. These birds obviously look very different from each other, so you shouldn't have too much trouble, but if you're just listening, it does take some practice. So about to the end here, I just wanted to give you a few more resources. One of the, I don't know how famous he is, but he's certainly one of the best known among ornithologists, birdsong experts in the world, Don Kreutzma, who has been publishing books and has a website where he has a section called Seeing Bird Sounds, and he does a very nice job. I followed some of what he did, but he goes into a little bit more detail, talking about what these sounds look like when they're put out on a display. What does a squeak look like? What is a nasal sound? Some of the stuff that Nathan Peplow also developed in his books. This is a very nice place, and he's got several books on bird song. One book he wrote while he rode his bike from where he taught in Massachusetts to, I think it was Seattle area, rode his bike across the country recording birds, and he wrote a book about that. So that's pretty fun stuff. So you probably found this at my YouTube channel, but if you found it some other way, I don't know how stuff is distributed these days. There are some other talks here on Bird Talk with Terry Rich on YouTube. And as you can see by the icons, the last who knows how many posts were of our screech owls that nested in our western screech owls that nested in our yard this year. And we have 70 or 80 hours of video that we have not actually analyzed yet, but YouTube has archived it and it's sitting there. So if you want to go look at this talk again, or look at some earlier talks about bird song, or look at a whole lot of owl video, and there's some other things there as well, please click over to YouTube to Bird Talk with Terry Rich, and then you can play this to your heart's content and listen to these songs again, compare what you like to compare at your own leisure. So that's what I had in store for today. Thanks for joining, and there's my email. If I have gotten something wrong or you have some ideas on how to tell these birds apart, or just general suggestions on birdsong identification, it'd be great. Just drop me a line, and I'm always happy to get feedback. One of the things I miss a lot, and I think everybody does, about doing everything on Zoom is you don't have that chance to learn from your audience and learn what they know about telling a bank swallow from a northern rough-winged swallow song. Check that out. That's some homework. See what you think about the difference in those two species. Pretty similar, and they look similar too. So again, thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.